The shovel struck frozen earth with a hollow thud that echoed through the mountain silence. Sarah Allen's hands, raw and bleeding, gripped the wooden handle as tears froze on her cheeks in the bitter December wind. The small bundle wrapped in her only good shawl lay beside the shallow grave she had been digging for the past hour. Her baby, her precious Emma, would never feel the warmth of spring or hear her mother's lullabies again. The sound of approaching footsteps through the snow made Sarah's heart race with terror. She had chosen this remote spot precisely to avoid discovery, yet someone had found her in her darkest moment. She clutched the shovel defensively, her breath forming white clouds in the frigid air as she turned to face whoever had intruded upon her grief. A tall figure emerged from between the pine trees, his weathered face shadowed beneath a worn hat. The man moved with the careful deliberation of someone who understood the weight of the moment he had stumbled upon. His dark eyes took in the scene, the small grave, the bundle, and the desperate woman who stood protecting both with nothing but a shovel and her fierce maternal instinct. Jose Luis had lived in these mountains for 15 years, and he had learned to read the signs of human suffering as clearly as he could track a wounded deer. The woman before him was not a criminal disposing of evidence. She was a mother saying goodbye to her child, and the profound sorrow emanating from her small frame spoke of a tragedy that demanded respect, not judgment. Without a word, Jose removed his own shovel from his pack and stepped forward. Sarah flinched, either expecting condemnation or threats to report her to the authorities. Instead, the mountain man simply began to dig beside her, his powerful strokes cutting through the frozen ground with an efficiency born of years working this harsh land. The unexpected kindness shattered what remained of Sarah's composure. She sank to her knees beside her baby's still form, sobs racking her body as this stranger continued the work she had begun. The sound of his shovel became a rhythm of compassion, each strike an acknowledgement of her loss and a promise that she would not face this alone. As the grave deepened, Jose finally spoke, his voice rough but gentle. "I have seen enough death in these mountains to know when it comes from cruelty and when it comes from the simple unfairness of life. This little one was loved. That much is clear." Sarah looked up at him through her tears, searching his face for signs of deception or ulterior motive. She found only a weathered kindness that seemed as permanent as the mountains themselves. She whispered, "She was born too early. I tried everything. But the cold, the lack of proper medicine, I failed her." Jose paused in his digging and met her eyes directly. "You did not fail her. This land fails us all sometimes. But love, real love, that never fails. I can see it in how carefully you wrapped her, how you chose this peaceful place. You gave her everything you had." The validation from this stranger meant more to Sarah than a dozen sermons from the town preacher who had turned her away when she had begged for help during her pregnancy. The mountain man understood something that the civilized world had forgotten, that sometimes survival required choices that looked like failure to those who had never faced such desperate circumstances. Together they worked until the grave was deep enough to protect the tiny body from scavengers in the elements. Jose helped Sarah lower the bundle with a gentleness that spoke of his own experience with loss. As they stood beside the completed grave, he removed his hat and bowed his head in silent respect. Sarah found her voice again, though it trembled with emotion. "I do not even know your name. Yet you have shown me more kindness than anyone in town ever did. Why would you help me when others would see only shame in what I am doing?" Jose replaced his hat and shouldered his shovel. "My name is Jose Luis, and I help because I understand what it means to be alone in the world. As for shame, I see none here. I see a mother who loved her child enough to give her a proper resting place despite having nothing left to give." The simple introduction carried weight in the mountain air. Names mattered here, where trust was earned through actions rather than words. By offering his name, Jose was extending more than mere courtesy. He was offering connection, something Sarah had been without for longer than she cared to remember. As they began the walk back toward the valley, Jose noticed how Sarah moved with the careful steps of someone weakened by recent childbirth and inadequate nutrition. Her thin coat provided little protection against the mountain wind, and her worn boots were poorly suited for the treacherous terrain. "Where will you go now?" he asked. "The winter is far from over, and these mountains show no mercy to those caught unprepared." Sarah wrapped her arms around herself, partly for warmth and partly for the comfort of her own embrace. I have a small cabin about 3 miles from here. It is not much, but it has kept me alive this long. I suppose I will continue there until spring, assuming I can find enough firewood and food to last. Jose studied her face as she spoke, noting the hollow cheeks and the way her clothes hung loose on her frame. Surviving alone through a mountain winter was challenging enough for an experienced woodsman. For a woman recovering from childbirth and already weakened by hardship, it would be nearly impossible. As they continued their descent, the conversation gradually revealed more of their respective stories. Sarah had come to the mountains 6 months earlier, pregnant and abandoned by a man who had promised marriage but disappeared when faced with the responsibilities of fatherhood. The town had offered judgment instead of assistance, forcing her to seek shelter in an abandoned cabin. Jose listened without offering platitudes or false reassurances. He understood that sometimes the most helpful response to another person's pain was simply bearing witness to it. His own journey to the mountains had begun with similar abandonment, though in his case it had been the death of his wife and infant son in a cholera epidemic. The shared experience of loss created an unspoken understanding between them. Neither felt compelled to offer empty words of comfort because both knew that some wounds could only be healed by time and the gradual rebuilding of hope through small acts of daily survival. When they reached the area where their paths would diverge, Jose paused and studied the direction Sarah would need to travel to reach her cabin. The route led through a particularly exposed section of mountainside where winter storms could create deadly conditions with little warning. Your cabin? Is it well supplied for winter? Do you have adequate firewood and food stores? Sarah's hesitation before answering told Jose everything he needed to know. I have managed so far, though I admit the supplies are running lower than I would prefer. I had hoped to gather more firewood before the heavy snows began, but circumstances prevented that preparation. Jose made a decision that surprised even him with its swiftness and certainty. I have a proposal that may benefit us both. My own cabin is well stocked and easily defended against winter storms. It also has space for 2 people to live comfortably without interfering with each other's privacy. If you would consider sharing the space, it would ease my mind to know that someone else was nearby in case of emergency. Sarah stared at him in amazement, uncertain whether to trust this unexpected offer of sanctuary. Her experiences with men had taught her to be suspicious of generosity that seemed too good to be true. Yet something in Jose's manner suggested that his offer came from genuine concern rather than hidden motives. That is an extraordinarily kind offer, but I must ask what you would expect in return. I have learned that few things in life come without a price, especially for women in my situation. Jose appreciated her directness and the wisdom behind her caution. I would expect nothing beyond what any decent person should offer to someone sharing their home. Help with daily tasks when you are able, companionship during the long winter evenings, and perhaps assistance with projects that are easier accomplished with 2 people working together. Nothing more than that. The sincerity in his voice convinced Sarah that his offer was genuine, but accepting it would require a level of trust that felt almost impossible after everything she had endured. Yet the alternative was facing the remaining months of winter with dwindling supplies and no backup plan if illness or injury left her unable to care for herself. I would need to think about such an arrangement. It is not a decision to make lightly, given that we are essentially strangers despite the kindness you have shown me today. Jose nodded his understanding. Of course. Take whatever time you need to consider it. My cabin is about 2 miles northeast of here, following the creek until you reach a clearing with 3 large boulders arranged in a triangle. If you decide you would like to accept the offer, you are welcome anytime. As they prepared to part ways, Jose reached into his pack and withdrew a small bundle wrapped in oiled cloth. Regardless of your decision about the cabin, please accept this. It is dried meat and some other supplies that might help you through the next few days while you consider your options. Sarah accepted the bundle with gratitude that went beyond words. Thank you for everything. The help with the grave, the offer of shelter, and especially for treating me like a human being deserving of respect rather than an object of pity or scorn. Jose touched the brim of his hat in farewell. Every person deserves respect, especially those who have faced the kind of hardships that would break weaker spirits. You have shown remarkable strength today, and I believe you will find the wisdom to make whatever decision serves you best." With that, they went their separate ways, Sarah toward her isolated cabin and Jose toward his own well-established homestead. Both carried with them the knowledge that an unexpected connection had been forged in the midst of tragedy. The wind picked up as Sarah made her way along the familiar path to her cabin, carrying with it the scent of approaching snow. The bundle of food Jose had given her bumped gently against her side with each step, a tangible reminder of the choice she now faced. Inside, Sarah built up her small fire and prepared a modest meal, using some of the supplies Jose had given her. The dried meat was of excellent quality, clearly prepared by someone who understood the importance of proper preservation techniques for long-term survival. As she ate, Sarah found herself thinking about the mountain man who had appeared at precisely the moment when she needed help most desperately. What mattered more than the timing was Jose's response to finding her in such a vulnerable situation. He could have reported her to the authorities, demanded explanations, or simply walked away. Instead, he had offered practical assistance without judgment. Sarah spent the evening taking inventory of her supplies with a more critical eye than she had allowed herself before. The results were sobering. Her firewood would last perhaps 3 more weeks if she was extremely conservative with heating. Her food stores might stretch to 6 weeks with careful rationing, but that assumed she could supplement them with hunting or foraging, activities that would become increasingly difficult as winter deepened. The mathematical reality was inescapable. She could not survive until spring with her current resources, and she had no reliable way to obtain additional supplies before the weather made travel impossible. Jose's offer was not just generous, it might be her only realistic option for survival. Sleep came fitfully that night, interrupted by dreams of her baby and memories of the day's unexpected encounter. When she woke to the sound of wind howling around the cabin's corners, Sarah knew that her decision had been made not by careful reasoning, but by the simple recognition that she wanted to live. The morning brought fresh snow and confirmation that winter was settling in with serious intent. Sarah packed her few valuable possessions into a single bundle, secured the cabin as well as she could against the weather, and began the journey to Jose's homestead. The creek Jose had mentioned as a landmark was partially frozen but still flowing, its musical sound providing a counterpoint to the whisper of falling snow. Following its course through the winter landscape felt like following a lifeline toward an uncertain but potentially life-saving destination. When the clearing with 3 large boulders came into view, Sarah paused to study the cabin that sat nestled among the trees beyond them. The structure was significantly larger and more substantial than her own humble shelter, with smoke rising steadily from a stone chimney and windows that suggested both comfort and security. Jose emerged from the cabin before she reached the door, as if he had been watching for her arrival. His greeting was warm but not effusive, striking the right balance between welcome and respect for the difficulty of her decision. "I'm glad you decided to come. The weather is turning serious, and I was beginning to worry about anyone caught unprepared in these mountains." Sarah appreciated his tactful way of acknowledging her arrival without making her feel like a charity case. "I have come to accept your offer, if it still stands. I bring little with me except a willingness to contribute what I can to our mutual survival." Jose helped her with her bundle and gestured toward the cabin door. "The offer stands, and you bring more than you realize." Another person's perspective and skills are valuable beyond measure when facing a long winter in isolation. The interior of the cabin exceeded Sarah's expectations in every way. The main room was spacious and well lit, with a stone fireplace that radiated warmth throughout the space. Shelves lined the walls, filled with books, tools, and supplies that spoke of years of careful accumulation. Jose showed her to a smaller room that had clearly been prepared for her arrival, complete with a narrow bed, a chest for her belongings, and a small window that looked out toward the mountains. The space was simple but clean and private, offering the dignity of personal space within the shared living arrangement. "This room has not been used in some time, but I have tried to make it comfortable. If you need anything changed or added, please let me know. I want you to feel that this is your home as well as mine for as long as you choose to stay." The thoughtfulness behind the preparation touched Sarah more deeply than she had expected. "This is perfect. I cannot adequately express my gratitude for your kindness, but I promise to do my best to earn my place here." Jose waved away her thanks with gentle firmness. You have already earned your place by being someone who shows respect for life and death in equal measure. What I saw yesterday was a woman who honored her child with dignity and courage. Those are qualities that any household would be fortunate to have. Over the following days, they established routines that allowed them to share the cabin comfortably while respecting each other's need for privacy and independence. Sarah proved to be skilled at cooking and food preservation, while Jose handled the heavier outdoor work of maintaining their wood supply and checking the various traps and snares that supplemented their diet. The arrangement worked so well that Sarah began to wonder why she had been so hesitant to accept Jose's offer. The answer lay not in any deficiency of his character, but in her own difficulty trusting anyone after being abandoned and betrayed by those who should have protected her. Learning to trust again required daily acts of faith, small decisions to believe that this time might be different. The first test of their partnership came during a blizzard that struck in their second week together. For 3 days, wind and snow made any outdoor activity impossible, confining them to the cabin and testing their ability to coexist in close quarters under stressful conditions. Rather than creating tension, the enforced intimacy seemed to deepen their mutual respect and understanding. When the storm finally passed, they emerged to find their world transformed by several feet of new snow. The landscape had become both more beautiful and more dangerous, with familiar landmarks obscured and new hazards created by the weight of accumulated precipitation. Working together to dig out pathways and check their equipment, they functioned as a team with an efficiency that surprised them both. It was during this post-storm recovery that Jose made the comment that would change the nature of their relationship forever. As they worked side by side to clear snow from the cabin's roof, he said, "You know, I have been thinking about what you said that first day about failing your baby. I want you to know that if you ever decide you want to try again, to have another child, I would be honored to help you raise it properly." Sarah stopped working and stared at him in amazement. The offer was so unexpected and so generous that she could hardly process its implications. "That is an extraordinary thing to say. Are you suggesting that you would be willing to take on the responsibilities of fatherhood for a child that was not biologically yours?" Jose continued clearing snow as he spoke, his tone matter-of-fact despite the magnitude of what he was proposing. "Biology matters less than commitment when it comes to raising a child. What matters is creating a stable home where a young person can grow up feeling loved and secure. I believe we could provide that together, if you ever chose to pursue that path." The conversation opened possibilities that Sarah had not dared to consider since losing her baby. The idea of having another child had seemed impossible while she was struggling to survive alone. But Jose's offer suggested that circumstances might not always be so desperate. "I am honored by your offer, though I must admit the idea of having another child terrifies me after losing Emma. I'm not sure I could bear to risk that kind of pain again." Jose paused in his work and looked at her directly. "I understand that fear completely. I felt the same way after losing my own family. But I have learned that avoiding risk also means avoiding the possibility of joy. Not everyone gets a second chance at the things that matter most, but when the opportunity arises, it deserves serious consideration." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of voices calling from the direction of the valley. Both froze, recognizing that visitors in winter usually meant either emergency or trouble. Jose retrieved his rifle while Sarah moved to a position where she could see the approaching figures without being easily spotted in return. 3 men on horseback were making their way up the mountain path, their movements suggesting urgency rather than casual travel. As they drew closer, Sarah recognized one of them as Sheriff David Jimenez from the town she had fled months earlier. Her heart began racing as she realized that someone must have reported her presence in the mountains. Jose noticed her reaction and asked quietly, "Do you know these men? Are they likely to cause trouble for you?" Sarah nodded grimly. "The one in front is the sheriff from town. I do not know why he would come here, but it cannot be for any good reason. People like me do not receive social visits from law enforcement." Jose considered this information carefully. "Then we will handle this together. You are under my protection here, and I will not allow anyone to treat you with disrespect or make accusations without evidence." The simple declaration of solidarity meant more to Sarah than any grand gesture could have. In that moment, she realized that Jose's offer to help raise her future children was not just theoretical kindness, but a reflection of his fundamental character. The sheriff and his companions reached the cabin and dismounted, their horses steaming in the cold air. David Jimenez was a man in his 40s with the weathered appearance of someone who spent most of his time outdoors. His companions were younger men whom Sarah did not recognize, probably deputies recruited for this particular expedition. Sheriff Jimenez called out, "Jose Luis, I need to speak with you about a matter of some importance. We have reason to believe you may have information relevant to an ongoing investigation." Jose stepped forward, keeping his rifle visible but not directly threatening. Sheriff Jimenez, you are welcome to speak with me. But I should point out that you are quite far from your usual jurisdiction. What brings you into the mountains in the middle of winter? The sheriff's eyes swept the area around the cabin, taking note of the signs that more than one person was living there. We are investigating reports of suspicious activity in this area. Specifically, we have received information suggesting that someone may have disposed of human remains in an improper manner. Sarah felt her blood turn to ice as she realized that someone had indeed reported her burial of baby Emma. The careful ceremony that had felt so right and necessary was being characterized as suspicious activity, reducing her final act of love for her child to something criminal and shameful. Jose's response was calm but firm. "That is a serious accusation, Sheriff. I hope you have substantial evidence before making such claims, especially given the difficulty of conducting a proper investigation under current weather conditions." Sheriff Jimenez dismounted and approached the cabin more closely. "We have a witness who claims to have seen a woman burying something in the mountains several weeks ago. The same witness suggested that you might have been involved or have knowledge of the incident." Jose said, "Even if such an incident occurred, which I am not confirming, I fail to see how it would necessarily constitute criminal activity. People bury things in the mountains for many reasons, most of them perfectly legal and appropriate." The sheriff's expression hardened at what he perceived as evasion. "Mr. Lewis, I am not here to play word games. If you have information relevant to this investigation, I strongly encourage you to cooperate voluntarily rather than forcing me to take more formal action." Sarah realized that the moment had come when she would need to decide whether to trust Jose completely or try to handle the situation on her own. Stepping forward from her concealed position, she said, "Sheriff Jimenez, I am the person you are looking for. I buried my baby daughter in these mountains several weeks ago after she died from complications related to premature birth." The sheriff's attention immediately focused on Sarah, his expression shifting from suspicion to something approaching satisfaction at having located his target. "Sarah Allen, you are under arrest on suspicion of improper disposal of human remains and possible infanticide. You will need to come with us for questioning." Jose stepped between Sarah and the sheriff, his rifle now held in a more obviously defensive position. "Sheriff, I think you are proceeding too hastily. This woman has committed no crime that I can see. Burying a deceased child is not only legal but appropriate under the circumstances." After a tense standoff, Jose proposed a compromise. "Rather than making arrests based on incomplete information, why not allow Miss Allen to show you the burial site and explain exactly what occurred? If you find evidence of criminal activity, you can proceed accordingly." The proposal offered the sheriff a face-saving way to back down from his aggressive stance while still fulfilling his official responsibilities. After a long moment of consideration, Sheriff Jimenez nodded reluctantly. The trek to Emma's gravesite took nearly an hour through snow that had accumulated since Sarah's last visit. When they reached the burial site, the scene spoke for itself more eloquently than any words could have. The grave was marked with a simple wooden cross that Jose had helped Sarah construct. Everything about the site conveyed love, respect, and appropriate mourning rather than criminal disposal of evidence. After examining the grave with professional thoroughness, the sheriff straightened and removed his hat in a gesture of respect. "Well, I can see that this burial was conducted with appropriate dignity and care. While the failure to report the death was technically a violation of regulations, I do not believe that pursuing criminal charges would serve the interests of justice in this case." As spring approached, bringing with it the anniversary of their first meeting, Sarah and Jose began planning improvements to their homestead that would accommodate their growing relationship and provide greater security for their future. The projects they discussed reflected their confidence that they had built something permanent and valuable together. It was during the first warm week of May that Sarah realized she was pregnant again. The discovery brought a complex mixture of joy, terror, and hope that left her emotionally overwhelmed and uncertain how to share the news with Jose. When she finally found the courage to tell him, Jose's reaction exceeded her most optimistic expectations. His face lit up with genuine happiness, and his first words were, "This child will be the luckiest baby in the world to have you as a mother and these mountains as a home." Jose immediately began making practical preparations for the arrival of their child, expanding the cabin to include a proper nursery and gathering supplies that would be needed for childbirth and infant care. His thorough planning and obvious excitement helped Sarah believe that this pregnancy would have a very different outcome from her previous tragic experience. The summer months passed peacefully, with Sarah's health improving dramatically under Jose's attentive care and the abundance of fresh food available in their mountain environment. The baby grew strong and active, its movements providing daily reassurance that this pregnancy was progressing normally and healthily. As autumn approached, Sarah found herself returning frequently to Emma's gravesite, not out of morbid fascination, but from a desire to share her new happiness with the memory of her first child. She would sit beside the simple cross and tell Emma about the sibling who would soon join their mountain family, finding comfort in the continuity between loss and new hope. The birth, when it finally came in late October, was everything that Emma's arrival had not been. Sarah labored through the night with Jose's steady presence beside her, bringing their son into the world as the first snow of winter began to fall outside their cabin windows. The baby was healthy and strong, his lusty cries announcing his successful arrival to the mountain wilderness that would be his home. They named him Michael after Jose's father, and from his first day of life, it was clear that he would thrive in the environment that had nearly claimed his mother's life the previous year. Jose proved to be a devoted and capable father, sharing all the responsibilities of infant care with an enthusiasm that touched Sarah's heart and confirmed her decision to trust him with her future. As winter settled over their mountain home once again, Sarah reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this point. A year earlier, she had been burying one child in despair and solitude. Now she was raising another child in hope and partnership, surrounded by the love and security she had never dared to imagine possible. One evening, as they sat beside their fire with baby Michael sleeping peacefully between them, Jose said, "I want you to know that I consider myself the most fortunate man in these mountains. You and Michael have given my life a purpose and meaning that I thought I had lost forever." Sarah reached across to take his hand, feeling the calluses that spoke of his dedication to providing for their family. "We are the fortunate ones. You saved my life in more ways than I can count, and you gave me the courage to hope for happiness again when I thought such things were impossible." Their family continued to grow over the following years, with the birth of two more children who brought additional joy and purpose to their mountain home. Each new arrival strengthened their commitment to creating a safe and nurturing environment where children could grow up surrounded by love and community support. Michael developed into a confident and capable child who moved through the mountain environment with the ease of someone born to that life. His relationship with his younger siblings reflected the values of cooperation and mutual care that defined their family, providing hope that the next generation would continue their parents' legacy. As their homestead grew and prospered, it began to attract occasional visitors who had heard stories about the couple who had built a successful life in one of the region's most challenging environments. Some were travelers seeking directions or temporary shelter, but others were people facing their own desperate circumstances who hoped to find guidance or inspiration from Sarah and Jose's example. One particularly memorable visitor was a young woman named Carol Hall, who arrived in late summer with a story remarkably similar to Sarah's own. Pregnant and abandoned, she had fled to the mountains seeking refuge from a society that offered judgment instead of assistance. Sarah and Jose welcomed Carol into their home without hesitation, providing her with shelter, medical care, and emotional support during the final weeks of her pregnancy. When her baby was born healthy and strong, they helped her establish her own cabin nearby, creating the foundation for a small community of people who had found refuge in the mountains. The expansion of their isolated homestead into an informal settlement reflected the natural evolution of their success. Having proven that sustainable life was possible in the mountains, they became a beacon for others seeking alternative approaches to survival and community building. By the time Michael celebrated his first birthday, their mountain community had grown to include several families, all united by their shared commitment to mutual support and self-sufficiency. The success of their experiment in cooperative living validated Sarah and Jose's belief that human beings could create meaningful lives outside the conventional structures of civilization. Sarah found particular satisfaction in her role as the community's unofficial midwife and healer, using skills she had developed through necessity to help other women navigate pregnancy and childbirth safely. Her expertise, gained through her own tragic and triumphant experiences, made her uniquely qualified to provide both practical assistance and emotional support. Jose emerged as the community's primary organizer and protector, coordinating group projects and representing their interests in dealings with the outside world. His reputation for fairness and competence made him a natural leader, while his obvious devotion to Sarah and Michael provided a model for stable family relationships. The success of their mountain community continued to evolve and expand over the following years, with new families arriving regularly and existing residents developing increasingly sophisticated approaches to agriculture, crafts, and trade. What had begun as a desperate refuge for outcasts had transformed into a thriving settlement that served as a model for sustainable community development. Sarah's expertise as a healer expanded to include not just medical care, but also counseling and support for people dealing with trauma and loss. Her own experiences had taught her valuable lessons about the process of recovery and healing that she could share with others facing similar challenges. Jose's role as community leader evolved to include formal recognition from territorial authorities who appointed him as the official administrator for their district. The position provided him with legal authority to resolve disputes, coordinate with other settlements, and represent their community's interests in territorial governance matters. Their children grew into capable and confident young people who embodied the values of cooperation and mutual support that defined their community. Michael, now approaching his teenage years, showed particular aptitude for the practical skills of mountain life, while also demonstrating the diplomatic abilities that had made his father such an effective leader. As their settlement approached its 15th anniversary, Sarah and Jose began contemplating the legacy they wanted to leave for future generations. Their success had proven that alternative approaches to community organization could work, but ensuring that success would continue required careful attention to the principles and practices that had made it possible. One particular challenge arose when a group of wealthy investors expressed interest in developing mining operations in the mountains near their settlement. The proposed development would bring economic opportunities, but also threaten the environmental integrity and peaceful character that had made their community attractive in the first place. The debate over the mining proposal tested their consensus-based decision-making processes in ways they had not previously experienced. Through extensive discussion and careful consideration of alternatives, they developed a position that protected their environmental concerns while creating opportunities for economic development that aligned with their principles. The successful navigation of this challenging issue demonstrated the maturity and sophistication their community had achieved over 15 years of growth and development. Their ability to address complex problems through cooperative decision-making validated the effectiveness of their alternative approach to governance and community organization. As their settlement celebrated its 20th anniversary, Sarah and Jose began planning a comprehensive celebration that would acknowledge their achievements while also looking forward to future possibilities. The festivities brought together current residents, former community members, academic researchers, government officials, and representatives from other communities that had been inspired by their example. Sarah's keynote address at the anniversary celebration focused on the personal transformation that had made their community's success possible. Was she? 20 years ago, I came to these mountains as a broken woman who had lost everything that mattered to me. I found here not just shelter and safety, but the opportunity to discover that human beings can create something beautiful together when they choose cooperation over competition and compassion over judgment. Jose's address complemented Sarah's by focusing on the practical lessons their community had learned about effective governance and sustainable development. He emphasized the importance of consensus-based decision-making, environmental stewardship, and economic cooperation in creating communities that could thrive over the long term. The anniversary celebration became not just a commemoration of their achievements, but also an educational opportunity for those interested in alternative approaches to community development. The event attracted visitors from throughout the territory and beyond, establishing their settlement as a recognized center for innovation in community organization. The mountain cemetery where Emma rested had become a place of pilgrimage for visitors seeking to understand the origins of their community's unique character and values. The simple grave marker served as a reminder that their success had grown from tragedy and that the most profound transformations often emerge from the most difficult circumstances. Michael, now a father himself, regularly brought his own children to visit Emma's grave and learn about the aunt they had never met, but whose brief life had shaped their entire family's destiny. The stories he shared with them emphasized the importance of compassion, resilience, and community support in overcoming life's inevitable challenges. The legacy of Sarah and Jose's mountain community continued to grow and influence broader discussions about sustainable development and alternative approaches to social organization. Academic researchers began studying their settlement as an example of successful cooperative governance, while government officials considered their model for addressing problems of rural development. Their children, now adults with families of their own, carried forward the values and practices they had learned while growing up in the mountain community. The multi-generational nature of their community's success provided evidence that their alternative approach to social organization could be sustained over time rather than representing merely a temporary experiment. As their settlement approached its 25th anniversary, Sarah and Jose were honored as founding pioneers whose vision and persistence had created something of lasting value for the entire region. The celebration brought together representatives from dozens of communities that had been inspired by their example. The keynote address at the anniversary celebration was delivered jointly by Sarah and Jose, reflecting their partnership in all aspects of community development. Sarah said, "Our community began with a simple act of human compassion when a stranger chose to help rather than judge, to support rather than condemn. That moment of unexpected kindness became the foundation for everything we have built together." Jose added, "What we have learned is that human beings are capable of creating something beautiful together when they choose cooperation over competition and long-term thinking over short-term gain. Our success has not come from avoiding difficulties, but from facing them together with shared commitment to our common values." The anniversary celebration concluded with the dedication of a permanent memorial to Emma, whose brief life and tragic death had catalyzed the creation of their entire community. The memorial garden that surrounded her grave had become a place of reflection and inspiration where visitors could contemplate the connections between loss and renewal, between individual tragedy and collective triumph. As Sarah stood beside the memorial with her family and community gathered around her, she reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them all to this moment of celebration and recognition. The path from that terrible day when Jose had found her bearing her baby to this moment of community triumph had been long and difficult, but it had led to a life richer and more meaningful than anything she had ever imagined possible. Their personal love story had become part of a larger narrative about human potential and the possibility of creating meaningful alternatives to conventional approaches to social organization. Their mountain community stood as a living demonstration that even the most challenging circumstances could be transformed into opportunities for growth and renewal when people chose to support one another. As the celebration ended and community members returned to their homes and families, Sarah and Jose walked together to Emma's grave for a private moment of reflection and gratitude. They stood in silence beside the simple marker that had become the symbolic heart of their community, remembering the day that had changed everything and celebrating the life they had built from that moment of shared compassion. The evening star appeared above the mountain peaks as they made their way back to their own home, where their grandchildren waited to hear once again the story of how their community had begun with an act of unexpected kindness in the midst of tragedy. The story had become a cherished part of their family's heritage, a reminder that love and community could triumph over even the most difficult circumstances. Their mountain home had become a beacon of hope for anyone seeking proof that alternative approaches to life and community were not just possible, but profoundly rewarding. The success of their experiment in cooperative living continued to inspire new communities and influence broader discussions about sustainable development and social organization. The mountain wind whispered through the trees around their home, carrying with it the sounds of a community at peace with itself and confident in its future. The transformation from despair to hope, from isolation to belonging, from tragedy to triumph was complete. But the story continued with each new sunrise over their mountain home, each new child born into their community, and each new person who found refuge and renewal in the place where love had conquered loss and cooperation had triumphed over adversity.